dramatic
Well, I mean,
name introduction.
would you rather just be regular? Hi, I'm Pastor D. There you go. Does that work? Okay.
Just saying, it was very dramatic.
Okay, well, why don't you answer one? Because they don't know who the heck you are.
I already said who I was.
I didn't hear it. Why don't you give it to me one more time?
Ashley.
Oh, you just can't say Ashley. No?
That doesn't sound right.
Fine. Well, okay, yeah, in the context of what we're at, you're right. It doesn't sound right. This is the episode 39 of the Practical Path podcast. We're just having a little bit of fun. We like to try to keep that. I guess that's why 20 years this year we've been married. Oh man, that's a long time. Still love this.
Lifetime.
Yeah. In fact, it is life
Sometimes
in
it
prison.
feels longer than
Whatever.
a life sentence.
Okay, so I want to thank God for all that we do, and often I don't always pray. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever prayed at the start, but I think it's something that God is telling me we should do. So I'm going to start doing that from now on, and it's going to be very simple. Father, I want to thank you for this platform and thank you for the church that you've given us to power this podcast. Father, thank you for our connectivity, my wife and I. Thank you for the love that you provided for us and the mercy and the grace that you've given us. Lord, just continue to do that. Continue to grant us your divine favor and let your message come out in this podcast today. Let those that we're looking to hear it, and for those that are already on your path, let them spread that message. Your holy name, we ask these things. Amen. All right. So, the topic of tonight has a lot to do with youth. Okay. What do you know about youth in faith?
Youth and faith?
Yeah, man. What do you know about those troubled teens? Or smart teens. I don't know. It take actually. That would infer that troubled teens aren't smart. I'm sorry. They can be really, really smart. So no, we're not talking about that. But teenagers that don't necessarily see faith as an option, or they don't really know. Don't really know, or they reject it. What do you know about that?
Well, part of it is they're trying to figure things out. I mean, if you think about our teens, I mean, they go through a lot.
I agree with that one.
Personal, within their own body, the changes, and then outside influence, and so I think even for adults, I think sometimes faith is the easiest thing to put to the side.
Okay.
And not try to figure out.
Okay. Well, I mean, how would you frame that, say, parental influence as an obstacle? Because I think it is. I think parental influence can really be an obstacle. Sometimes if it's done right, it's a boon. Parents should guide their kids from a faith perspective. That's a big deal. They should do that. But how can that be a problem? How can that be an obstacle for the kid?
I mean, like negative, positive, or any
Negative.
negative?
Yeah.
Well, I guess I don't know if you're looking at it as in the parents have faith and Christ followers, or they're not.
The parents are faithful, maybe or maybe not. But I see it both ways. I see how parents not being faithful can be an obstacle for the kid, and how parents being faithful can be an obstacle for the kid.
I guess if the parents are faithful, the obstacle I see is how much pressure are they putting on the kid to believe how they believe and do exactly what they're doing.
Okay.
And depending on how much the parents are requiring out of the kids, if it's a lot, it could push them away. And I guess it could push them away too with what the parents are telling them to do, like how to pray, when to pray, what to read, what to think of it.
Okay.
That could mesh with the kid's own personality and their own thoughts.
Right. Totally agree.
and what works best for them.
I totally agree.
Now, if they're not a faithful parents, then, I mean, vice versa, if they could be putting a bad spin on being a Christ follower,
hmm
and you're tainting or poisoning the child's mind already against
Because they're not faithful.
Christ, because they're not faithful and they're putting their own thoughts and opinions
Mhm.
out there.
Yeah.
Not that I don't think it's bad that a parent tells a kid how they feel about Christ. I think you have to find that balance between this is what we believe, but that doesn't mean that you have to.
Right. Totally understood. And that right there is kind of the balance, right? So from a parent's being not faithful, they don't believe in God, or they don't ascribe to Christianity, or any religion, giving their kid no moral center in that regard. That right there, that's a bad thing. Now, I'm not saying, the next person has to believe what I believe. No, that's not what Christianity is about. That's not what God tells us that we have to do. All we are supposed to do is preach the message, and we let the Holy Spirit do his thing. But if a parent doesn't have that foundation in themselves, how can they pass that on to their kid, right? And often, since kids mimic their kids or imitate, I mean, since parents imitate the kids, since the kids imitate their parents,
There are some parents that imitate their kids.
I cannot argue with that. I cannot argue with that.
Whole nother
That's a whole other topic. We might actually do that one night. Yeah, if a kid is imitating their parents and they take on their parents' values and their parents' moral structure, the way that their parents function in the world, or mini-me's, you know what the popular term is, mini-me. Um, then often the kid will adopt that same logic. God doesn't exist. I can't believe in him. I don't believe in him. I don't believe in Christianity. Blah blah. That right there is a bad thing. It doesn't give the kid any moral center or any moral start. At least not a healthy one, in my opinion. Now, when it comes to a parent being faithful, okay, it is all too easy for a parent to say, "I believe in God, so you got to believe in God." Kind of like what you alluded to and what you were saying. But at the end of the day, if you go about it the other way, like you were saying, where, hey, I believe, I'm going to tell you about my faith. I'm going to tell you why I believe. I'm going to tell you what God's done for me. I'm going to witness and testify to you as Christ said we should. And then let the kid, once he's, gone mature, make their own decision for Christ. Then that's a better way of doing it. That's the way it's supposed to be done. We aren't supposed to conscript children into faith. We are supposed to lead them in, from a faith-based logic, a faith-based way of life, and give them the good news. Definitely preach the message to them. Definitely represent God, through us, from us, out to our children, out to the community, and expose our child to a faith-based community. You know, and again, let the child absorb what we're teaching, and then the child can go from there. When they've reached competence, they can then say, okay, well, I want to go this route, or I want to go that route. And for me, I look at these obstacles that some Christians deliver upon their children, and I can only shake my head. I mean, with our kid, we're in the church. We definitely, try to live a Christ-centered life. I mean, we're doing a Christ-centered podcast, for goodness sakes. But um, we don't beat our kid over the head with, "You must believe as we believe." But we do tell him what God has done for us, and he's around a community, and in church with us, and getting exposed to what that is. But we don't, slam him with that.
The only thing that we can make him do is he has to come to church with us.
Right. He has to go.
And he has to sit there during the once he's done with his, because he makes lattes at the church, which he
And he's
loves
pretty good
doing.
at it.
But once he's done cleaning that up, he is required to come sit during worship, whatever's left of it, and during the sermon,
Right. Hear
and
it.
listen.
Yeah, that's the exposure.
That's the extent of what we make him do.
Right. We're not beating him over the head with it. And I mean, those are just some of the obstacles, right? That are parental. I mean, look at it. You really have faith in schools anymore. You can't say the Pledge of Allegiance. That one nation under God thing.
You
You
can't even
can't
say Merry Christmas anymore.
precisely.
Everything's a holiday.
Yeah, it has to be so generalized now. Um, Me personally, I have no problem with saying one nation under God. I believe that's who we are. That's what the world is. Um, and I mean, you got other obstacles too, right? So many different groups out there that are anti-faith. So many different people that want to question the Bible. They want to question the faith-based life. They want to question Christianity. And guess who they hit to first when the adults can actually offer a cogent debate, or at least be able to explain their faith and defend their faith. When an adult can do it, the youth are the first that they go after next, because the youth are still deciding. I mean, that's something that any group would do. I mean, if I was unscrupulous, right, and I was trying to convince a bunch of adults of, let's say I'm in a room of 100 people, and let's say there's 50 of them, or 60 or so that are adults, 30 of them are kids. If I was unscrupulous and I see that I'm preaching whatever message, and the 60 adults aren't nodding their heads, bobbing, saying, yeah, let's do that, or yeah, we're about that. But I see that the kids are kind of rocking it out to what I'm saying. I'm going to start talking to the kids. I'm going to adjust what I have to say to try to motivate the kids. The kids might motivate the parents. And that's what a lot of these groups do. I'm not going to get into all the different kinds. I have my politics. I'm not going to preach that here. But what I will say is that when it comes to faith, okay, there was a time where I was a youth pastor for about a year, and when we were in there, we spoke about God, but there again, we gave the fundamentals, and it was both of us. It wasn't just me, but when we gave the fundamentals weren't, you must believe in God, you must this, you must that, you must this. It was this is what God has done for us. Have you made a decision for Him? And if so, why? And if not, that's fine. Why? Because the decision, while important, the why behind the decision is more important, at least in my opinion, because then when you get to the why, okay, that's where you can start exploring a few more things. The decision is what it is.
Well, and you can also use the why is, like, if you take the baptisms. Some faiths
we did a few of those.
Yeah, some faiths baptize you when you're a baby.
Which isn't a baptism.
Some churches, and like ours, do it when you get older, and it is a personal decision that you make.
Which is a baptism.
Right. And we did one when we were doing the youth. Not doing when
Two.
We had a baptism came up when we were helping teach the youth as well. And we did talk to them about what it means to be baptized, what your life should look like if you do choose to be baptized.
Mm-hmm.
And when they said, yeah, I want to, we asked them why. Yep. To make sure it wasn't because everybody else was doing it, that it was a genuine desire, want.
Which is what teenagers do sometimes. They'll just try to jump on the bandwagon for whatever because it's a popular thing.
Which is what our son was doing. He's like, yeah, I could get baptized. And then when we said, well, why? He said, well, because everybody else in the group is doing it. And he said, well, that's not good enough.
Yeah, that's not a good reason. So our son didn't get baptized that day. I believe baptism is pretty big, right? It's one of those big deals. So we weren't going to force the issue, and we weren't going to let him misrepresent faith in the Lord in that regard. So it's something we didn't allow him to do. Now, I will tell you, the couple of kids that we did do that day, that we baptized that day, they actually offered a good reason. One of which, kind of was the reason was kind of shaky, and then we probed again, and we talked to them, and eventually that kid, gave an answer that made sense, and they eventually did the baptism. So I guess the long and short of it is, you guys out there that are parents of kids that are coming into their teens, coming into those years where their hormones are going crazy and they don't know their head from their rear, but they're trying to figure it out. Beating them over the head with the Bible or forcing these kids to try to be faith oriented, it can definitely push them right out of God's arms. And the thing is, God's arms are always open. But we don't want to be, we as parents, we don't want to be, that shoehorn that takes our kids right out of his arms because they make a decision to say no to God just because we are heavy handed, faith based parents. Um, and those of you that aren't faithful, those parents of you that aren't faithful, that's fine. It's cool. That's your lifestyle. I'm not here to tell you that you should be faithful. What I'm here to tell you is that I believe in God because God has done an incalculable amount of provision towards me and towards my family. And that if you gave God a chance, you will understand a better lifestyle. Doesn't mean you're going to be rich. Doesn't mean that you're going to be suddenly king of the world or anything like that. It's a better lifestyle to live than just drifting through this violent, crazy world that we have right now. And taking your kids along on that ride, saying, hey, I'm choosing faith. Here's why I'm choosing faith. Do you have any questions? Or what would you like to know about it? That right there is a great start for breaking down the obstacles of a child trying to come to faith. You have anything you would like to add?
I guess I would say too, if you still are not faith based and don't want to follow Christ, that's fine. But if your child comes to you expressing wanting to look into it, don't discourage it.
Yeah.
It doesn't harm anybody. You
Yeah.
physically are not going to be harmed or mentally harmed if your child decides to follow Christ.
Okay. Yeah.
Let them explore.
Yeah. Or point them to someone like if they, if you want to be a good parent, point them to someone that is faith based. There's millions and millions of Christians. Trust me, you know somebody. Point them to somebody that you trust, a friend, family member, what have you, and let them get some questions answered. Because kids are all about the questions, whether they're teenagers or younger. They are definitely all about the questions. And most of those questions are internal. They don't ask them. Encourage them to ask questions. Either way. Well, that was episode 39. I'm Pastor D.
Ashley.
There you go. Everybody, you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we will see you next week. Take care.